going on. I'd like to welcome everybody to CorelDRAW, a cutter and a heat press, the many possibilities. My name is Ron Bastian. I'm going to be your host today. Today's webinar is sponsored by Total Graphics Network. That's the training part of our company. And mysupplyhut.com is the supply side. So anything that you need for supplies is there, and you can always go there to order your supplies. It's also sponsored by our Captured on Video series. And that's a series where we teach you how to use CorelDRAW to do different things with and how to learn the program properly. What can you produce with CorelDRAW, a cutter and a heat press? This webinar today will cover many of the different products that you can make for little or no extra money. You might be able to add another offering to your customers that will keep them coming back to you again and again. Let's face it, the more new stuff you can come up with, the more people will be interested in seeing what you have to offer. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about all the different things that we can do with CorelDRAW, a cutter, and a heat press. My goal for today, this will be an interactive discussion between all of you that are present today at the webinar. We're going to share great ideas from everyone and provide options that you will have never considered or thought were possible. Be prepared to share your own great ideas and learn from others as well. Please pay attention and take notes while you join in on the discussion. Try to make sure that all class participation is on today's topics. I will try to keep the subjects from running off on a tangent and into other areas. I hope to keep our time spent together today to under an hour, but if we run over, that's okay. If we do, it's only because there's a lot of material we want to cover, and it's what you need to know. Today's class level, this is a little bit different type of a class. It's more of a general and an interactive class than anything else. So today's webinar is going to be more like a roundtable discussion. This is not your normal type of webinar. My role is not only to teach a little bit, but also to keep the discussion going in as orderly a fashion as I can. I'll interject questions, polls, and other thought-provoking ideas that will keep us moving forward to help each other learn more about what you can do with CorelDRAW, a cutter, and a heat press. How can you participate? Well, we started talking about this a little bit ago, but number one, in the question area on the right-hand side for the webinar, you can type in a question or an answer or a comment, and I'll read them out loud, and we'll all try to answer them if it's a question. But number two, if you have a microphone or if you're listening in on a telephone, when I ask the questions or I ask for participation, simply raise your hand and I'll unmute you so you can speak up and everybody can hear you. That way any statements you want to make, any questions, can be heard by everybody. So let's not wait. Let's go ahead and get things started. Today's subject, of course, covers CorelDRAW, or designing software. A cutter, a way to take the designs you've made and turn them into some kind of a creation. And heat presses, the application port, how to display what you've created. Okay. As I had said, today we're going to take some polls for everybody so we can all start to learn more about each other and what's going on. The first poll that I want to take of everybody who's here, I want to find out what equipment do you own. So give me a second. I'm going to put that poll up. And I want you to tell me, what equipment do you actually own? Do you own CorelDRAW, a cutter, and a heat press? Do you own just CorelDRAW and a cutter? CorelDRAW, a cutter, and a heat press? Or just a cutter? If you don't own any of this stuff, you don't have to vote. I'll just assume based on the numbers that you're just here to find out a little bit more about CorelDRAW, a cutter, and a heat press. And we'll have other things for you to answer later on. I've got 75% of you who have voted so far. I'm going to keep it open for another 3 seconds. If you can vote on this, please do. And we're going to close it. And this time I'm going to share the results with you. Out of everybody in attendance today, 78% of you actually own CorelDRAW, a cutter, and a heat press. So what that tells me is that everybody, well, the majority of people, have a lot to say about what they do with CorelDRAW, a cutter, and a heat press. 11% of you own CorelDRAW and a heat press, and 11% of you own just a cutter and a heat press. So let's find out more. The next poll that I want to take is, for those of you who own a cutter, do you think that your business could do without the cutter? Now that you've built your business and you have the cutter and it's in place, can you do without it? Let's go ahead and take a vote on that and find out how many people think that they can do without their cutter and how many people think they can, or they need their cutter. So if you would, please vote. Do you think you could do without your cutter? We're going to take about another 20 seconds or so, so if everybody could vote, just simply click on yes, no, or, for those of you who don't have a cutter, I need to get one to let you know. And that's okay too. I didn't expect everybody on the webinar today to actually own a cutter. So, okay, another 3 seconds, and we're going to close the poll. And let's take a look at the results. Now, based on the question, do you think you could live without a cutter? 9% of you are saying yes, you can live without a cutter. And what that tells me, if you think you can live without your cutter, you're not doing enough with your cutter in order to get its fullest potential used. For those of you who answered no, 64% of you, then you must be using your cutter to great advantage while you're in your shop. So I look forward to hearing from you about what you do with your cutters. And 27% of you, a little over a quarter of the people here, need to get one. So, and that's fine too. So I hope you get some good information from people who are already using one to make a decision on whether or not you want to get a cutter. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Now, for those of you who do own a cutter, I want to take and get the next question answered with you, which is, how often does your cutter actually sit idle? Let me go ahead and launch that poll. And is that never? Your cutter is always running? Is your cutter always idle? It's idle for 2 to 3 hours a day, 4 to 6 hours a day, or 7 or more hours a day. Now, the reason I'm asking this question is to make sure that you're taking full advantage of your cutter. And if your cutter is sitting idle between 4 to 6 or 7 hours a day and not working, you're losing money. I know when I owned my sign shop that when I came in, and from the time I came in to the time I left, if the cutter stopped working and it wasn't lunchtime, I really wanted to know why. Okay, because if that cutter's not running, that means I'm not making money. Okay, so that's why it's important for you to answer this question for yourself. So let's go ahead and close the poll. Well, actually, only 50% of you, 57% of you voted, and that's to kind of be expected because not everybody owns a cutter. I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share it with you. And 13% of you who own a cutter say that it never sits idle, and that's good. 25% of you say it always sits idle. Now, if it's always sitting idle, or 38% said 4 to 6 hours a day it's idle, 25% said that 7 or more hours a day it sits idle. We're going to try today to give you some more things to think about to make the cutter work more often. So that's really what the intent is for today's webinar. Finding out more ways to make your equipment, your heat press, your cutter, and your CorelDRAW work more to make you more money. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hide that poll. And let's move to the next page. We're going to start out now. We're going to talk about art design. Okay, when I say art design, most of you probably own CorelDRAW. Okay, but there are other different types of designing software that's available. Some of you may own some of these or exclusively use some of these. For example, some other options to CorelDRAW would be Adobe Illustrator. It's also a general design program just like CorelDRAW. FlexiSign. FlexiSign is more of a focused design program for sign makers. Then there's a program called Inkscape, and that's more of a general program, just like CorelDRAW and Illustrator. SignLab, it's another sign making software. And then for those of you who have a cutter, you might have gotten some off-brand of these other softwares that came with your cutter that you use for design. So what I want to know is, and what I'd like to do is open up the phone lines. Open up the mic lines and open up the question area to find out if there's anything else out there that you may be using on a regular basis. For those of you who have microphones and can participate in talking, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you and you can make your statement or ask your question. But what I want to know is there anything else, any other software right now that you're using on a regular basis? Okay, so we must have pretty much covered it because I don't have any hands being raised. I don't have any questions being asked, questions or statements. Okay, so we must have covered all the different design elements or software that's available in the marketplace. And that doesn't surprise me because in this area of artwork design, there aren't a whole lot of programs. Because there's a lot of programs out there that are very good at what they do, and they're the ones listed, and those are the ones you should be using. Okay, let's move on now and talk about a cutter, the creating part of the cutter, or the part that makes the designs for us. Okay, there's different cutter types that are available, and the first one that comes to mind, like you see here in the picture, is what are known as a blade cutter. Now, these use actual knife-type blades to move around and cut the design. Now, interestingly enough, these cutters have evolved from what are known as plotters, where people used to put pens in and they used to draw these pictures on paper. But a cutter with a blade in it, a plotter with a blade in it, is able to cut out designs in different types of medias. And we're going to talk about that in a little while. The next type is what is called a laser. Now, do I have any laser users out there? If you would, raise your hand for me. Do you have a laser cutter? So if you would, raise your hand to let me know that you have a laser cutter. What a laser cutter does is it uses an actual laser beam to cut through the materials. And I'm interested to find out more about how the laser cutters work in your day-to-day activities. So there are a couple of you that have raised your hands that you actually have a laser, so it's going to be good to hear from you. And let us all know what you do with your laser. The next type of cutter are what are called printer cutters. And they're a combination of a full-color printer and a cutter. A couple of these are kind of like, they're called the Roland VersaCam. Muto actually puts out a printer and a cutter. It's two separate units. But the idea here is you can print anything you want and then cut around the design and either make a sticker out of it, a transfer, a painting, whatever it is. Okay? So these are another type of cutter that are available. When I taught this class live once, I had somebody stand up and raise their hand and say they own a plasma cutter that they run from CorelDRAW. And I found that kind of funny until I found at another seminar a second person did that. So now I include in different cutter types the plasma cutter. And what this is a hot gas tipped cutter, which is actually used to cut through different thicknesses of metal. Okay, and they have it connected to Corel, and they use it to do sculptures, and they use it to do parts. So I found that pretty interesting that somebody had Corel connected to a plasma cutter. So next, what I want to find out from you is, are there any other types of cutters that you use? So again, if you use a different cutter, if you have a microphone, raise your hand, I'll unmute you, and you can tell us about it. Or you can go ahead and make a statement in the questions area, and I'd be more than happy to read it to others if you don't have a microphone. So let's take a second and see if we've got some people who want to make a comment. Okay, I don't have people raising their hands, and I don't have any questions. So my assumption is we've kind of covered the area of cutters, what types of cutters are available out there. There might be a few others that might be older or newer coming out, but these are the real basic ones that kind of everybody uses. So let's move on to the next step, and that is a heat press, doing the actual application. Now, in this situation that we're talking about, in some instances, a heat press is only optional. If you're a sign maker, for example, and you cut sign vinyl and you apply it to banners, magnetic signs, cars, trucks, vans, you have what's known as pressure-sensitive vinyl. And the pressure that you apply actually glues it down. So you wouldn't have need for a heat press. However, if you decided you wanted to get into another area, like doing t-shirts, okay, you could actually use a different type of material called a heat-sensitive material, which is heat-activated, and you can actually start doing shirts and things like that. So let's talk about the different types of heat presses that are available. There's the clam. That's what you see here. It works on a hinge and closes on itself in the back. Then there's a swinger where the actual heat head moves out of the way so you don't burn your knuckles. The clam is known as a knuckle burner, but the newer clams nowadays I've seen are opening even wider, so you don't have that problem as much anymore. Then there's the shuttle press where you load it and shuttle it into the machine. Automatic presses where you hook up air compressors and they do all the work for you. You also have to load your garment or whatever it is you're going to apply to. Then there's dual machines, a hat press, a plate press, a cube press. If you need it or if you name it, they'll make it for you. There's actually heat press manufacturers. You tell them exactly what you want it for. I've seen actually large enough heat presses to do sublimation transfers onto sails, boat sails. So it's amazing the type of heat presses that can be made. In those cases, sometimes they even use heat ovens to transfer the dye from sublimation. So a lot of different types of heat presses out there. And if you know of any others, I'm not going to take any questions or raising of hands. There's a lot of different ones out there. But the key here is that you realize it's actually optional. It depends upon what you want to do. So we're going to talk about a little bit about that next. So what do you do with the equipment that you have? So we want to start discussing what it is you're doing with this equipment. For example, somebody who's in the embroidery business might be using this equipment to do applique. Somebody who's a sign maker, a sign maker, might make vinyl signs using vinyl lettering, or they'll have a print and cut device where they print it and then apply it. Sporting goods manufacturers might use this equipment for doing letters and numbers. Screen printers are using it for short-run graphics or making rubies or amberlith of spot color designs for their screens. Engravers might be making awards and other different things with this equipment. Sublimation, you're doing full color prints and then putting it back into a cutter to do an outline cut. Transfers, if you make transfers, you're doing letters and numbers and graphics. And yes, there's something new out there that's just being talked about and really getting larger and larger, and that's called rhinestones. A lot of people have this equipment just to do rhinestones, but it can do more than rhinestones, and that's what we want to get across here. If you have rhinestones and you have your heat press, you could do letters and numbers and graphics all day long. You can do vinyl signs. You can do all kinds of stuff with this equipment. If you have a printer, you can actually do a full color print through your printer, put it back into the cutter if it has an optical eye, and get it to cut around the design. So you can peel it off, have the shape, and transfer it. What I want to know now is, what is your business? What do you do with your equipment? Now, I really want to take some time now to hear from you. So if you have a microphone and you can tell me what you do and what you do with your equipment, please raise your hand for me. I really look forward to hearing what you guys are doing with your equipment. And if for some reason you don't have a microphone or you're too shy and you don't want to talk, feel free to go ahead and put your comments into the question area. And what I'll do is I'll read them out loud and let other people know what it is you do, what your business is, and what you do with your equipment. Morgan writes in and tells me that they're doing wall graphics. And I'm assuming that means that they're cutting them out on their cutter. They're making them large enough to put on a wall. And I'm hoping, and it's a possibility they're not, they're using a removable vinyl, because there's actually sign vinyl out there that's removable for you to do wall graphics with. Sandy writes, I'm an embroiderer. I do t-shirts, jackets, and bags. Bags, that's another good thing to talk about when you're dealing with high schools, when you're dealing with teams. You can do bags in your heat press, but you just want to make sure that your heat press doesn't touch the plastic zippers or the plastic areas of the bags. So what I tell people is, if they get some mouse pads, they can actually build their own heat platen for areas that they want to heat apply to but don't want to touch edges on. You know, like the end of a gym bag, it's round, it's circular. If you cut a few mouse pads, just the area of the gym bag that you want to heat apply to, not the plastic cording around the end, but the end, if you put it over the mouse pads, you can heat just the end. So those are fun things to do, and they're profitable. Victoria writes, we are a college research laboratory. Okay, we mostly do sublimation with our printer and heat presses. Well, that's great. I can't say I've ever had somebody from a college research laboratory before. When you do sublimation, though, Victoria, what do you do it on? I'm just curious. Morgan writes back, she's using Oracle 631 to do her wall graphics with. So in case people were wondering about which material she's using to do it with. Donna writes that she does glass decoration with vinyl. She also uses frosted vinyl on glass. That's something that people don't really think about. And it is called frosted. I think it's called something else too. But it's like a translucent vinyl that you can cut. And when you cut it, you can put it on any glass surface, and it looks like etching. It's also good for mirrors. I put that up in a lot of gymnasiums where they just want a subtle hint of something that they want to say, and it really works nicely. Let's see. Another thing that we do is window tinting. I guess that they use a window tint material, and it comes in different shades, like 10%, 20%, 30%, and they cut their templates for the windows out of it. Victoria writes back and says, various student projects will print patterns. I'm sorry, Victoria is the college research, they're in a college research laboratory. Various student projects will print patterns, pieces with images, and transfer them to textiles, then cut these out. So they're kind of doing a applique type of thing, and then they must be doing it sometimes for, I'm assuming, I'm just guessing, theater or something like that, where they have to make some costumes and stuff. I've had a few people doing that as well. So these things that everybody's bringing up are great ideas and things that are going on. It's nice to see different things going on from different people. And sometimes when I'm at a show, I'll talk to people about what they do and what they do with their equipment. And some of these have actually been mentioned before, but I've actually forgotten about them because I don't do it. And that's what we want to do today. We want to tell you about things that other people do that you're not doing, that you might want to consider doing to put more money in your pocket and to offer more things to your customers that somebody else isn't offering. Okay, so let's see. I need to go back and see if anybody raised their hand. I don't have any hands raised, so nobody wants to speak. And I think we're done with the statements and questions. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Now, if you want to continue to post statements and stuff while I'm talking, that's great. I'll come back and read them afterwards, and we'll just pick up where we left off. So that's a good thing. So go ahead and keep writing me in, and we'll just keep things moving. The next thing that we want to talk about is what materials do you use? Now, as we were starting to talk, Morgan, I believe, told us about an actual material that she uses to do her wall graphics with. Okay? Let's talk about some other materials that are available. So, if you're an embroiderer, you might be using twill to do your applique with. And there's many manufacturers of twill out there. And then other types of heat-applied materials, such as specialty materials, things like that that are heat-sensitive that you can cut on your cutter. Next, if you're a sign maker, of course, we talked about this a little bit, you might be using pressure-sensitive vinyl and even printable materials to do your printing and cutting with. Sporting goods and screen print dealers, they might use different types of heat-sensitive products. If you check out mysupplyhut.com, you'll find a whole bunch of different products. There's representation for snakeskin up there. There's camouflage. So if you don't have a printer to print these things out, you can buy them, make them, and use these patterns as well. For example, when my son went to high school, the name of his school was Fitzgerald, and they could always buy the screen printed Fitzgerald shirts and all that kind of stuff. But what I did for him was I took some camouflage material, the black and green and white stuff, and I cut the name of the high school out in a vertical arch. I gave it to him, and he wore it to school one day, and he comes back and he says, "Dad, we got a problem." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" I said, "Did I spell something wrong?" I'm good for that. I don't spell very well. He said, "No." He said, "I wore the shirt to school, and I've got literally 25 or 30 people that want one." And I looked at him, and I said, "You know what? That's no problem at all. Here's some order forms. Get their information. Get half the money up front, and we'll make them for them, and they can pay it when they get them." So that turned out to be a fun little thing to do. But that's the kind of stuff you can get for heat applying. So with that little story, I also want you to remember this. Adding rhinestones to any business is probably right now the most economical thing to add to your business, as well as the most profitable. Now, there you're going to be using things like stencil material, backer board, various stone supplies, and you can get into rhinestoning pretty inexpensively. So next, based on the story that I told about my son and sending him to school with things, what materials are you using to make money with? Is there something that I didn't cover? And I wasn't totally specific, but I'd like to hear what you do with your materials. For example, I also once had a sign maker who wanted to do some t-shirts, but he wanted to be able to do a reasonable facsimile of applique. He wanted the full color in the fill areas, but he wanted to be able to do a, it's called a satin stitch around the edge. And he didn't own an embroidery machine. He didn't know anybody who wanted one. So what he did to come up with the answer to this was he used a product called Thermoflex Plus to do the solid color areas. But then he used a product called Flock. It's a very fuzzy material that has a 3D look once it's applied. And around the actual shapes, he put about 1/4 of an inch of this flock around it to look like a border. And it actually gave the illusion of something that had been embroidered and done as applique with a satin stitch. So these are the kind of innovative things that people are doing out there. So let's hear what you have to say. If you want to go ahead and speak up, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Otherwise, let's go and see if we have any other statements of what other people are using for materials to make money with. So let's check the questions area and see if anybody's got their hand raised. Okay, nobody seems to want to speak about this stuff, but I hope at least you're getting some information from me about different things. The different types of material that are available are vast. And focusing in on what you want to do is important in order to solve the solution. So if you have CorelDRAW or a design software, if you have a cutter, all the different things that are available for a cutter nowadays is tremendous. And a heat press is just another optional thing to be able to do something different to heat apply to different types of garments. Don't forget, you can put just about any kind of a garment into a heat press. We talked a little bit about bags earlier. I've had people put tennis shoes in heat press. I've had people do all kinds of crazy stuff in heat presses. My suggestion, if you're going to do something like this, is to always test first, and don't forget to use Teflon sheets on top of what you're doing and underneath what you're doing, just in case something screws up so you don't have to clean that heat press. Okay, let's move on. Let me close this. Now, I'm actually coming to the end of my presentation, and there's a few things that I want to say to encourage you a little bit. Number one, I want you to remember this. Make the equipment and the software that you already have invested your hard-earned money into do more for you without spending a lot more money to do it. Every minute your machine is not working, it's not making you money, so put the machine to work doing other things to make you money. That's why I was asking you those questions earlier. If your machine isn't working at least half the day, it's not making you any money. As a matter of fact, if it's sitting idle and doing nothing, you're actually either making a payment on it or losing money because of it. So don't let that happen. Find other ways to make your cutter work harder to make you money. If you already own CorelDRAW, a cutter, and a heat press, you only need to get different materials and supplies that will allow you to add an entire new product line to your business. You may also need to learn some new skills like application, like if you're an embroiderer and you're doing applique and you want to make some magnetic signs or some banners. You might have to learn how to apply that material properly, and you may need to learn a little bit more about designing for that type of an output. But once you've mastered that, you're all done. You can continue to offer it to your customers. And the one thing you don't want to do, if you own an embroiderer shop and somebody comes in and asks you, can you make magnetic signs, and you tell them no, they'll go someplace else to find somebody who does. But nowadays, more than 70% of all companies do other things. That sign maker making the magnetic signs might have an embroidery unit and do embroidery on their own. And because you turned away a customer to go look for themselves to find something, they may leave you to go to the other person who helped them out. So keep that in mind as you're looking into what it is you want to do with different things. And don't forget to let your customers know that you have a new product for them to take a look at. Send out samples and email them information on these new products that you've developed. Now, there's a key word in that statement, which is email them. If you and your business are not collecting email addresses at this point and sending out monthly newsletters to your customers to let them know what's going on in your business, you're missing out on an opportunity to get in front of your customer more times. So please, in your business, if there's anything out of today's webinar you're going to take with you to build your business, start collecting email addresses, develop an electronic newsletter. If you have CorelDRAW, you can publish it as a PDF file and always just send them the PDF file. Okay? So keep that in mind as you're thinking about what we're talking about today. Okay? Now, it's time for general discussion. Questions and answers, and your opinions. Now, if you want to talk, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you. And if you want to go ahead and make some statements, some comments, some questions that we can answer, please feel free to type them in the questions answer. From here on out, it's pretty much open. For the next 15 or 20 minutes, it's all you folks. So let's go ahead and take advantage of this time together. Mary asked the question, what is the name of the wall graphic material? Can it be printed? The wall graphic material, again, that they mentioned is called CorelDRAW 631. And I don't know if Morgan actually prints on it or not. Morgan, do you print on that wall graphic? We'll come back to, oh, Morgan says yes. You're good. You're quick at this. Morgan says yes, and apparently it can be printed on. So it's a combination material, I'm assuming. So again, it's called CorelDRAW 631. Sandy's writing us, what is the best kind of cutter to get? Well, there's probably a lot of opinions here about that. If people want to go ahead and give their opinion, I'll mention it back. But I'll give you my opinion. A cutter is a cutter is a cutter. You want to make sure of a few things. Number one, you want to make sure that the cutter comes with cutting software. You don't want to spend extra money on software that you don't need. So make sure whatever cutter you buy comes with cutting software that doesn't cost anything extra. Next, if you want to do everything you want to do with a cutter, you want to make sure you've got a cutter that has what's known as a servo motor and can get somewhere between 400 and 600 grams of pressure. These two things will allow you to cut not only sign vinyl and heat applied materials, but it'll also let you cut the thicker materials like applique and the stuff for rhinestones. So you can do more with it. Now, I'm a little prejudiced because I sell GCCs. Fitting into that category are two models, the Puma and the Jaguar. The Puma runs about $1,500. The Jaguar runs around $2,200. Both are just as good. The only difference for you between the two, the Puma only goes up to 400 grams of pressure. The Jaguar goes up to 600 grams of pressure. So that's my opinion about it. Let's see if anybody else speaks in. Kevin says, what do cutters range in price? Well, I've actually got a cutter for sale for like $400. You can find them from $400. When I bought my first cutter back in the 80s, it cost me $5,000. Okay? That was my first 24-inch cutter. I spent $5,000 on it. Nowadays, that same cutter, believe it or not, that $400 cutter that I just mentioned, will do the sign vinyl that I wanted it to do that I paid $5,000 for. What's a good price range? I would say anywhere between $1,000 and $2,000 should get you the kind of cutter you need. Just make sure it's got the servo motor. Make sure it's got the higher gram force so that you can do everything you want with it. Something else you might want to consider if you want to do everything is making sure it has what's called an optical eye. The optical eye allows you to take something, print it out to a printer with the crop marks, put it back into the cutter, and the optical eye will read the crop crop marks, reposition the cutter, and cut around your design. Now, if that's something you want to do in the future, that's probably, if you include the printer, maybe $3,000 versus buying what's called the Roland VersaCam, which starts at about, I think it's $14,000 or $15,000. So getting started into printing and cutting is a little bit cheaper if you look at it and you have an optical eye on your cutter. Okay? Let's see. Trying to keep things organized here. Morgan states, make sure your cutter you get can handle wider widths as well. Morgan, what's the width on your cutter that you use? I usually recommend to people that you actually get at least a 24-inch cutter. I've got people asking me for a 12-inch cutter and a 15-inch cutter, and if you're going to grow your business, that's not going to do it. Okay? If at the very least you want to get is a 24-inch cutter. But if you even think you're going to get into the sign industry, then you're going to want to go to maybe a 36-inch cutter, a 48 or a 52-inch cutter. Okay? Because if you start doing 8-foot by 8-foot graphics, you don't want to cut 4 panels of 24 inches. You want to cut 2 panels of 48 inches. Okay? Morgan states that she owns 2 cutters, two 48-inch cutters and 2 30-inch cutters. So that tells you what Morgan owns. So, and I wouldn't go any lower than a 24-inch cutter. I don't know if Morgan agrees with me on that, but you're starting to get too small. Now, if you're only doing garments and you never want to do anything else again, then I can see that exception, but I would still rather you get into a 24-inch cutter. Okay, I think that was a good question. What's the best cutter to get? I'm a little opinionated, so sorry about that. Anyhow, I don't know what else everybody wants to talk about, but the floor is open. What I want to do, though, is I want to take one last poll while we're waiting. The last poll has to do with, would you like a personal consultation? Now, some of you may have individual questions that I didn't cover, but you really want to get an answer to it. And if you want me to give you a call, I'll be more than happy to. Just go ahead and answer the poll. Yes, you want me to call. No, you don't. If you don't want me to call, answer no. If you're really in a hurry and you want me to call you ASAP, list that. I'll try to get with you within the next 24 hours. And what we'll do is we'll do an individual one-on-one assessment of where you are, what you want to do, kind of like I did with the cutter there. You know, what kind of a cutter should you buy? I was really general about that, but I can get more specific if we decide that you want to have a one-on-one with me. Okay? So please take the time to answer that, and we'll see if anybody else has any other statements. Robin raised your hand. Robin, I hope you have a microphone. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you don't have a microphone, you'll need to type in your question. Robin, did you go away on me? Okay, you're back. Let me unmute you. And Robin, are you there? Hello? Robin, can you hear me? Okay, Robin, I don't know if you have a microphone or not. If you've got a question or a statement, type it in, and I'll go ahead and put you on. Well, I'll let people know what you want to say. So, at this point in time, we've got about 10 minutes left in the webinar, and I hope that everybody got something out of it today. We did do some sharing from certain people, so I appreciate the input. I hope everybody else does too. The more we can get together and talk about, you know, what it is we want to do with things, what we're doing with things, and try to help each other out, the better we're all going to succeed. So that's why we put this webinar together. It's kind of an experimental one. Normally I don't open the phones on people because, number one, they don't have a microphone. Number two, sometimes it ends up having a problem with hearing it. But I'd like to find a different way. If anybody knows a different way to have a good conference where everybody can speak, other than me dialing everybody up and putting them on hold and conference calling everybody, I'd really like to know. This way we can do more of these types of webinars. So feel free, if you'd like, to also put any kind of comments you want about the webinar. I'd love to see some of those. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stick around for a couple more minutes. If I don't see any hands go up and if I don't get any more questions, I'm going to end the webinar. However, please feel free. I will stay for as long as it takes to help answer questions. So I'm going to mute myself and wait to see if anybody else comes on. If nobody else has another question, folks, I hope you had a good time. I enjoyed speaking with you today. I look forward to joining you on our next webinar. If you haven't been to our website, TotalGraphicsNetwork.com, we have several different free webinars available. Please feel free to sign up for any webinars that you like, and we'd like to see you there. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now, but I will be checking. I'll come back on and answer questions if any come up. I'm actually getting a few statements. Leon says, great seminar. Mary says, thank you for your time. I'll check out the other webinars. So I really appreciate that. I do. Please feel free to put up any other comments that you'd like. I'm probably going to, unless I get a real good question, I'm going to stay on mute from here on out. So have a good night, everybody, and thank you. I did get a question that I think I might have missed. And Leon, I apologize. Can you do rhinestones with a GX24? My apologies. I'm sorry. I got a lot of stuff here I was reading. Yes, you can. And we can discuss that more in detail if you'd like. If you didn't click yes on the consultation, please give me a call at 866-207-9524. My extension is 301, and we can discuss that specifically. But yes, you can do rhinestones with a GX24. Okay. I've got Kevin asking a question. It says, excuse my ignorance, does the cutter take the place of a printer? If so, why is it more beneficial and per cost effective? I don't think, and still in this day and age, that a cutter would take the place of a printer. A cutter has its own specific things that it can do that a printer can't do, and a printer has its specific stuff that it can do that a cutter can't do. So I don't believe that I would answer yes to the question, does a cutter take the place of a printer? It's no. You still need a printer, you still need a cutter. So I hope that answers your question. The number again to contact me is 866-207-9524, and my extension is 301. Again, it's 866-207-9524. My extension is 301. A good time to call? Well, tomorrow, if you call me tomorrow, probably about 9 or 10. That's Eastern time.